This is Algebra 1, Term 4, Lesson 9, Different Forms. We'll begin in Desmos Classroom with some application problems. Then we'll move to our slides where we will explore different forms of quadratic equations, and we'll finish up with a quick graspable math activity. So let's begin in Desmos Classroom. So this is the Desmos Classroom activity. We will be comparing functions using different representations. So the first screen in the activity talks about an event planner, and they're going to be asking questions about this specific scenario. You will be working in a table, so that's one representation. They will be working with equations, and they will be working with graphs. So the questions will be asked about those independently, and then they will be put together. So this is where you're comparing one equation with a graph of two different functions and answering questions about it. Here we review projectile motion and talk about what might be a projectile. So we're just reviewing. On this screen you're looking at a vertical motion model, but one of the models is given as a equation and the other is given in a table, and students are asked to compare those. In this one they're looking at just the graph, and the same here on screen number 9. But when you get to screen 10, you're looking at different objects, and some of these objects are represented with a table and others are represented with an equation. They will need to click on this to read it. It's really small, and you see how it blows up, and then they'll be able to read what's here. So equations, tables, compare, and contrast. And then they will arrange these in order from maximum to minimum. I did give them the graphing calculator button here, so they might need that to compare if they aren't sure. And then the last screen here is a quick card sort. They are given 4 functions. Actually, 2 of them are represented with a table and 2 are represented with a graph, and then they're going to figure out what the maximum quantity is, and all of those maximums are represented with function notation. So this should go quickly. I would say 15 minutes to 30 minutes, depending on how well they've learned these concepts already. And then we'll move on to our slides. So the first screen in their slides, they're going to explore the 3 forms. So I've given them a graph, and in the graph I'm asking them to label the x-intercepts, the vertex, and the y-intercept, to include coordinates. They can even include text, so you can direct them however you want to do that. But they can click on the graph and they can see the vertex, but I want them to add that label over here. So they'll click here, add a label, and label this point. They want to add the label for the x-intercepts, add a label for the y-intercept, and then once they have all of those labeled, they're going to look at these forms that are already provided for them: factored form, vertex form, and standard form. And then where do you see those numbers in those labels? Where are you seeing those in these forms? And so once they're ready, they will take a picture, they will graph this with their labeled points and put it on their slide, and then they're going to talk about where they're seeing these forms. They can also take a picture of these equations and put them on this slide, and then talk about where in the vertex form, what are you seeing? In the factored form, what are you seeing? And in the standard form. So they should be able to look at those equations and determine some key characteristics of those graphs from those forms. Now once they've done that, they're going to kind of apply what they've learned. Here's a graph I'm giving them, and I'm wanting them to use the sliders to create this graph. And they want to replace all these question marks that are in red here with numbers. So it's kind of a busy graph. I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to click on sliders. And you have a whole bunch of parabolas here, a whole bunch of sliders. So my suggestion is to turn off this one and only focus on this one. And then once they're satisfied with that one, they can turn it off and go to the next one. So they will move this around, and their goal is to create the one that's here. So they should know what they're looking for, and if they don't, then they can come back over here. If they're not already doing it, they should place their graph, their Desmos graph, and this graph side by side so that they can be looking at this. Another thing you could do to help them out is put this up on a big screen in front of the class, and that way they're not having to go back and forth. They can just look up at this as they're working and try to get those to match. Once they get them to match, they can put their numbers in here. The next screen they have is a tile model. So they're going to use this tile model, this picture, to try to figure out what the factors are and what the product is. Well, we just did that little box method in our last assignment, so we'll see how well they learned it. But the standard form is actually represented by a trinomial, and the factors are represented by these things on the sides here. So these are what are being multiplied, and the product of those two is the trinomial. So they're going to put it here. One way to check their answer is put these both in their graphing calculator and check to make sure that they're matching. Okay, here we have the trinomial given. So the questions is what are the factors? Well, it's already done, so they just have to be able to read it. So talk about that and let's see if they can figure it out. Now this number in front, it's not really showing up in this model. They have to figure out where that's coming from. Again, have them play with this. Don't give them too much assistance up front. Let's let them try first. But what they can do is type in their equation into their Desmos calculator and make sure that their equation that they're typing here with these question marks will give them the same graph as the one they started with. Okay, here they have factors given, x plus 1 times x minus 3, and we're trying to produce an algebra tile model for this. So they will go to GeoGebra. Now the directions in the slide in their show notes tell them when you get here to be sure to use not the expressions mat. Let me scroll down here. But they're going to click on this little drop down and choose product mat so that they'll have these little lines here, and then they can drag these tiles here and here to put those in. The reason I gave them models to start is so they can go back to these and kind of look at where these factors were, and they can see where these factors were, and then they can make sense of that as they're creating their own here on this slide. Now once they have this made, they need to write in here some numbers, put in some numbers to make the standard form for that equation. Now the next part of the activity is a card sort. This one's much shorter than the last one. They only have 5 different functions to look at, and they're going to work with their team to complete the card sort. So let me show that to you now. Okay, this is the card sort. So each row of this card sort will have a graph and 3 equations. These do not match. They will cut these out and lay them down, and I've given you a handy little grid here for them to lay them out. So they want to put all the ones that match in a row, and it doesn't matter the order. They can go in any order they want, but the graph would go on the far right, and then they're looking for the vertex form, the factored form, and the standard form that fits that graph, and they will do that all the way through. So there's only 5. I would say this card sort should take them maybe 15 minutes. If they're working in teams, it'll go pretty quickly. Once they're finished with their card sort, I ask them to take a picture of the completed sort and just put it on this slide. Alright, now we're going to practice doing this using the box method. So they will take the box just like we did in the last assignment. And they will place their factors on the side of their box, and they will fill in the box by multiplying. And then their standard form is a trinomial, so they should get a trinomial, y equals a trinomial. Now again, just like before, they should be checking these answers using their Desmos graphing calculator. They want to make sure that the factored form and the standard form are producing the same graph. Here they have vertex form. Well, on this one, they're going to multiply the 2 binomials, and then they're going to subtract the 7. Now, at this point, if students are like, they've not done them like this, we've not gone from vertex form into standard form before. So if they're struggling here, you might go ahead and do your graspable math activity and then come back. But what they are actually doing is they're squaring the binomial like they would if it was just a regular binomial times a binomial. And then they will combine that with the -7 when they're finished. And then we're going to kind of mix it up. So here we have factored form, and the question at the bottom is what form is this? So they should recognize it. And then we have another vertex form, and they'll square the binomial and then add the 2 to their result. Another factored form. And then they have a function. This is going in reverse. They have a standard form. Use the graph to locate the vertex and the zeros, and then use those to try to write this equation in vertex form and in factored form. So using the graph, let's figure this out. We'll do the same thing with this one. This one's a little more interesting because of the fact that it's going the other way. But again, they can find their own vertex, they can find their zeros, and they can use those to construct equations for this function in vertex form and in factored form. So the last thing we're doing, if you haven't already started, is this graspable math activity. So let's head there. So this activity has 10, and it's really both types. So you have 5 of each. So let's go ahead and look at our goal state, our first one. They're all goal states, by the way. This goes quickly. In the top right corner, there's actually a video. It's an animated GIF. So watch it and let the kids watch it and use that to determine what they need to do with their gestures. So if you look closely, the first thing you do is you see the little arrow pointing at that 2. You're double tapping on this 2 to square that binomial. And they should immediately notice they're getting a trinomial when they square a binomial, and that's always true. They can combine like terms here, and then they can put that 2 on top of that 2 to multiply those, and now they've got the answer. Once it turns green, they go to the next one. The screens 1 through 5 are all the same type. So they're squaring the binomial and they're adding that number. This is why I said earlier, if the students are a little confused about how to go from vertex form back to standard form, this might clear that up for them. Let's take a look at goal state 6, because this is when you get into the other type. Now we're multiplying 2 binomials. Well, in graspable math, to multiply 2 binomials, you're basically using the distributive property twice. So if you take this and drag it over, and if you see up there at the top, this is exactly what that's doing. You're distributing the x plus 3 through the other binomial. And then you can move that, whatever's on the outside of the parentheses, inside by distributing. And then you're going to combine like terms. So let's see, we have an x squared here. If you click these, it will combine those. And then you're done. So again, follow this little graphic here for the first one, and then the last 4 will be just like that one. This concludes our lesson, different forms. We have one more lesson before our next assessment. Y'all have a great day.